Ever wish you could just, breeze through life winning everyone over to your side?
Oh, like some kind of persuasion ninja.
Exactly. And while we're at it, who wouldn't love to avoid all those pointless arguments that never really go anywhere?
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into some seriously powerful strategies for doing just that. And,
Buckle up.
yeah, we're exploring choice bits from Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Classic.
It really is a treasure trove of practical advice. And the best part is it's chock full of real life stories and historical examples. So get ready for some fascinating insights you can actually put to use right away.
What always gets me about Carnegie's work is how he kind of flips the script on how we usually approach persuasion.
Oh, how so?
He argues that winning people over isn't about dominating every conversation or
Yeah.
like proving how smart you are.
Makes sense.
Instead, he throws down this pretty bold statement right from the start. You can't win an argument.
Now that's interesting. So is he saying that even if I'm right, arguing my point won't really get me anywhere?
Exactly. Think about it. Have you ever won an argument where the other person actually walked away happy, ready to embrace your idea?
It's pretty rare now that you mention it.
Right. Carnegie says even if you win the logic battle, you often end up losing the bigger war for influence. Arguing just digs people deeper into their own position.
It's like pouring gasoline on a fire and expecting it to go out.
Perfect analogy. And Carnegie illustrates this point with a great anecdote about this famous aviator, Sir Ross Smith, who was like a national hero back then.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, at a fancy banquet in Smith's honor, Carnegie gets into this heated debate about, of all things, a Shakespeare quote.
Oh, boy.
And he was absolutely convinced he was right. But a friend later told him he was completely mistaken.
Oh, I bet that was awkward.
It could have been,
Yeah.
but his friend wisely pointed out that there was just no point in trying to prove the other guy wrong, especially in that setting. I mean, it wouldn't have changed the guy's mind
Yeah.
or certainly made him like Carnegie anymore. So sometimes the more persuasive move is choosing not to argue at all.
So it's about picking your battles, right? Knowing when to back away, even if you're totally sure you're right.
Precisely. And Carnegie backs this up with examples from the business world, too. He tells the story of Patrick J. O'Hare, a truck salesman who, let's just say he loved a good argument.
I've met that type.
Right. Always sparring with potential customers. But as soon as O'Hare stopped arguing and actually started agreeing with customers, even when they criticized his trucks, his sales skyrocketed.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't about admitting defeat. It was about shifting the focus to the positive side of what he was selling, finding that common ground.
So instead of getting trapped in that I'm right, you're wrong cycle, it's about finding ways to connect, right?
Yes. And Carnegie's next principle builds on that idea. He says, always show respect for the other person's opinions and never tell them they're flat out wrong.
But what if they are wrong? Like really wrong?
Well, the thing is, we all have blind spots. Even Theodore Roosevelt, the speak softly and carry big stick guy, admitted he was probably only right 75% of the time. Right. So a little humility can go a long way.
So maybe hold back on the I told you so's.
Exactly. And Carnegie shares this cautionary tale about a young lawyer arguing a case before the Supreme Court. The lawyer was actually right about a point of law, but he corrected one of the justices in such a blunt and, disrespectful way that he ended up losing the case, even though he was right.
Ouch. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. So it's not just about being right, it's about how you present your argument.
Right. And Carnegie digs into the psychology behind this, citing James Harvey Robinson, who argued that as humans, we cling to our beliefs with incredible tenacity. So being told we're wrong often feels like a personal attack, even if it's something totally insignificant.
That explains why some people get so heated about things like grammar rules or the right way to pronounce a word. It's a matter of pride.
Exactly. And Carnegie uses a personal story to illustrate this. He was arguing with a friend about the price of some draperies he'd bought. When his friend said he'd been overcharged, Carnegie got all defensive, even though he kind of suspected he probably had paid too much.
And you've all been there.
Right. But later, when a different friend admired the same draperies and wished she could afford them, Carnegie readily admitted he'd been overcharged.
Fascinating. So his reaction completely changed based on whether he felt like his judgment was being attacked or validated.
Exactly. It shows how deep-rooted our defensiveness can be.
So how do we overcome that?
Well, Carnegie suggests that if you think someone is wrong, instead of saying you're wrong, try something like, I thought otherwise, but I could be wrong, Let's look at the facts together.
Okay, that's a good one. Turning a potential confrontation into a collaborative thing.
Exactly. And this leads us to Carnegie's third principle, which is a real gem. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. He kicks this off with a story about himself, his dog Rex, and a rather intimidating policeman in the park.
Oh, I think I've heard this one. Isn't this where he accidentally lets Rex off the leash?
That's the one. He knew he was breaking the leash law, but instead of arguing with the officer, he immediately owned up to his mistake. And guess what? The policeman, who was totally ready to write him a ticket, completely softened and let him off with a warning.
So admitting you're wrong can actually work in your favor.
It's disarming. By acknowledging his mistake, Carnegie allowed the officer to take the high road and show some leniency.
It's like he gave the officer a chance to be the good guy.
Exactly. And this plays into a fundamental human need, the desire to feel important and respected.
This reminds me of that story about the lawyer who lost his Supreme Court case by, well, being right but disrespectful. Admitting fault, even when it's tough, seems a lot more effective than defending yourself at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Carnegie provides a bunch of examples to illustrate this point. Like, he tells the story of Ferdinand E. Warren, a commercial artist who won over a notoriously difficult client by immediately admitting to a tiny error in a drawing.
And that worked.
Totally diffused the situation. The client's anger just vanished, and he actually ended up giving Warren more business. It goes to show that admitting fault can build trust and lead to stronger relationships.
It's kind of counterintuitive. We're so afraid to admit when we're wrong, but it can be the key to moving forward productively.
It's about shifting our focus from protecting our ego to actually solving the problem.
Okay, so we've learned we can't win arguments, we should respect other opinions, and that admitting fault can be like a superpower. What other wisdom does Carnegie have in store? All right, so we've tackled some pretty big ideas. Avoiding arguments, respecting other opinions, and admitting when we're wrong. I'm ready for more Carnegie wisdom. What's next?
Well, his next principle is all about setting the right tone from the get-go. He calls it a drop of honey, and he starts with this brilliant analogy, the fable of the sun and the wind.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. The wind tries to force the traveler to take off his coat, but just makes him hold on even tighter.
Right.
And then the sun gently warms him up, and he willingly takes it off.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates how a gentle, friendly approach can be way more persuasive than force or aggression.
So it's about catching more flies with honey.
Precisely. And this is especially crucial when you're dealing with people who are already upset or resistant to your ideas. Carnegie tells this amazing story about John D. Rockefeller Jr., who was facing a violent strike by coal miners in Colorado.
Oh, wow.
The miners hated Rockefeller, blaming him for their terrible working conditions.
That must have been an incredibly tense situation to navigate.
It was. When Rockefeller addressed the miners' representatives, you can only imagine the animosity in the room. But instead of meeting their anger with anger, he started his speech with warmth and genuine appreciation.
Wow, that's unexpected. What did he say?
He actually told these miners, who just days before wanted to lynch him, that it was a red-letter day in his life to be able to meet with them. He talked about visiting their homes and meeting their families and really emphasized their shared interests.
That's incredible. So even in that incredibly charged environment, he chose to focus on connection and common ground.
He understood that establishing a human connection was absolutely crucial to diffusing the tension and opening the door to dialogue. And you know what? His approach worked.
It did.
The miners were totally disarmed by his friendliness and eventually agreed to go back to work.
That's a testament to the power of a friendly approach, even in the most challenging circumstances. But how do we apply this in everyday life? It's not like we're facing down angry mobs all the time.
Right. Well, Carnegie gives tons of real-world examples of how this principle can be applied in less dramatic settings. He tells the story of a man named O.L. Straub who wanted to get his rent reduced.
Okay.
But his landlord was known for being incredibly tough.
Oh, I've dealt with those types.
Yeah. So instead of complaining about the high rent, Straub showered the landlord with praise for how well he maintained the building.
And that work?
It did. The landlord, totally taken aback by this unexpected appreciation, offered to lower Straub's rent without him even asking.
So sometimes a little strategic kindness can go a long way.
Exactly. And Carnegie offers another example involving a man named Dean Woodcock who worked for an electric company. Woodcock was overseeing a repair job that, because of some unusual circumstances, required a larger-than-usual crew. He noticed a man taking pictures, and realized it looked like, a classic case of corporate waste and inefficiency.
Uh-oh. I can see where this is going. Someone's about to get an earful.
Well, that's what you'd think, right. But instead of getting defensive or ignoring the photographer, Woodcock went right up to him, explained the situation, and even acknowledged that it looked bad from an outsider's perspective.
So he chose honesty and transparency over defensiveness.
Exactly. And the photographer was so impressed by Woodcock's openness that he put away his camera and thanked him for the explanation.
These stories really highlight how a friendly approach can diffuse tension and build rapport, even when you're dealing with potentially difficult people.
And Carnegie's next principle takes us a step further. It's about getting the other person saying yes, yes.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
This is where he introduces the Socratic method, a technique named after the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. The idea is to ask a series of questions that are designed to elicit yes responses from the other person, gently guiding them towards your desired conclusion.
So it's like building a bridge of agreement, one yes at a time.
Precisely. Each yes is a stepping stone, leading them closer to your way of thinking without them even realizing they're being led.
Okay, I can see how that could be really powerful. Got an example?
Carnegie shares a story about James Eberson, a bank teller, who used this technique masterfully. A potential customer came in to open an account, but refused to answer some of the questions on the form.
I've encountered those types. It's like pulling teeth.
Right. But instead of getting into a power struggle, Eberson shifted his focus. He asked the customer if he would want the bank to easily transfer his money to his next of kin in case of his death.
Makes sense.
The customer, of course, said yes.
Smart move. Everyone wants that peace of mind.
Exactly. And then Eberson smoothly transitioned to asking for the name of his next of kin so the bank could, fulfill his wishes. The customer, who had been so resistant before, readily provided the information.
Wow, that's brilliant. By focusing on what the customer wanted and getting him to say yes repeatedly, Eberson was able to bypass his resistance and achieve the bank's objective.
It's a perfect example of how the yes-yes technique can transform a potentially adversarial situation into a collaborative one. And Carnegie provides another compelling example involving a salesman named Joseph Allison, who had been trying to land a major client for 13 years.
Wow, 13 years.
He finally made a small sale of motors, but the client was unhappy because he thought they were running too hot.
Oh, I bet that was stressful. After 13 years, he finally makes a sale. And then this, what did he do?
Instead of arguing or getting defensive, Allison used the yes-yes technique brilliantly. He agreed that the motors were running hot and that the client shouldn't buy more if they didn't meet industry standards.
So he validated the client's concerns.
Exactly. And then he asked a series of questions, each designed to get a yes response, guiding the client to realize that the motors were actually operating within acceptable temperature limits.
He turned a potential complaint into a teaching moment.
Exactly. And by framing his questions in a way that got the client nodding along, he skillfully turned the situation around and secured a $35,000 order.
Okay, I'm convinced the yes-yes technique is going in my mental toolkit. What else does Carnegie have up his sleeve?
Well, his next principle might seem a little counterintuitive at first. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
Wait, really? Isn't persuasion about getting your point across?
It is, but sometimes the best way to do that is to actually step back and let the other person express themselves fully. We all have an innate desire to feel heard and understood. And when you give people the space to do that, you create a sense of trust and receptivity.
Okay, I can see how that makes sense. Any examples?
Carnegie tells this hilarious story about a sales rep who won a $1.6 million contract because he lost his voice and was forced to let the client do all the talking.
No way. He closed the deal without saying a word.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The client loved having such an attentive audience. And as he talked, he basically sold himself on the product, convinced by his own arguments.
Wow, that's incredible. So sometimes silence really is golden, especially when it comes to persuasion.
Exactly. And this principle can be applied in personal relationships, too. Carnegie tells the story of a woman named Barbara Wilson, whose relationship with her teenage daughter was, well, let's just say it wasn't going so well.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. She realized she'd been doing all the talking and never truly listening to her daughter's perspective.
That's so common, especially with parents and teenagers. We think we know best and end up lecturing instead of listening.
Right. But once Barbara started asking questions and genuinely listening to her daughter's concerns, their relationship improved drastically.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the most persuasive thing we can do is just shut up and listen.
Exactly. Active listening can be incredibly powerful. And Carnegie offers another anecdote about a man named Charles T. Kubellis who used this principle to land a job. Before the interview, he did his research on the company and its founder. During the interview, he expressed admiration for the founder's accomplishments and encouraged him to talk about his early struggles and successes.
So he appealed to the founder's ego a bit.
Well, it was more than that. He showed genuine interest in the founder's story, and the founder, flattered and eager to reminisce, talked at length about his career. By the end of the interview, he was so impressed with Kubellis that he offered him the job on the spot.
That's amazing. So by being a good listener and showing genuine interest in the other person, he was able to create a connection that led to a job offer.
Exactly. It shows the importance of making people feel valued and respected, which ties into Carnegie's seventh principle.
We've uncovered some seriously insightful stuff from Carnegie so far. Learned about avoiding those arguments, respecting other opinions, and how admitting fault can be incredibly powerful. We've also seen how a friendly approach, strategic questions, active listening, and making people feel like they own the ideas, how all that can be incredibly persuasive.
Mm.
I'm sensing a theme here, like all these principles are about, shifting our focus from ourselves to the other person.
You nailed it. Carnegie's seventh principle takes that even further. It's about making the other person feel that the idea is theirs.
Ooh, okay, I like that. That sounds almost like a Jedi mind trick.
It's not about manipulation. It's more like planting seeds, subtly guiding the other person to discover the idea on their own.
Right.
This works especially well with people who hate being told what to do or, what to think.
Oh, absolutely. We all like to feel like we came up with those brilliant ideas ourselves.
Exactly. It taps into our need for autonomy and creativity.
Yep.
Carnegie gives a great example with Adolf Seltz, a sales manager who, he needed to motivate his discouraged team. So instead of lecturing them or dictating new strategies, he asked them what they expected from him as a leader.
Interesting.
Then he cleverly flipped it and asked them what he had a right to expect from them.
He turned it into a two-way conversation.
Exactly. And the team, energized by being included in the process, came up with their own goals and commitments, which led to a huge increase in sales.
So he empowered them to, take ownership of the solution?
Precisely. Carnegie also shares the story of Eugene Wesson, who, remember, had been trying for 3 years to sell his sketches to a particular stylist. He finally got his break by bringing the stylist some unfinished sketches and asking for his input on how to, finish them in a way he could actually use.
Ah, so he made the stylist feel like a collaborator in the design process.
Exactly. That simple change in approach made a world of difference. The stylist felt invested in the outcome, and as a result, he started buying Wesson's sketches.
That's a great example of how, involving someone in the creative process can be way more persuasive than just trying to sell them on your prepackaged ideas.
And this principle works wonders in personal relationships, too. Carnegie shares an anecdote about Paul M. Davis, who wanted to take his family on a historical tour of the East Coast.
Okay.
But he knew his wife had been dreaming of a trip out west to the western states. So instead of dictating the itinerary, he cleverly planted the seed with his daughter, who had just studied American history in school.
I bet he, casually suggested visiting some of the historical sites she'd learned about.
You got it. Of course, his daughter was all in. And a few days later, his wife, picking up on their daughter's excitement, suggested the East Coast trip as her own idea. Pretty brilliant, right?
Totally. Everyone's happy, and Davis gets his preferred vacation without any arguments or power struggles. I love it.
It's a good reminder that even in our personal lives, a little strategic finesse can make things so much smoother.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground. We've learned it's impossible to win an argument, that we should respect other opinions, and that admitting fault can be incredibly powerful. And we've seen how a friendly approach, strategic questioning, active listening, and making people feel like they own the ideas, all of that can be incredibly persuasive. What's the final piece of this puzzle?
Well, Carnegie saves the best for last. His eighth principle is maybe the most profound, but also the most challenging. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
So this is about stepping outside of our own perspective and really trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. It's about understanding their motivations, their fears, their desires, even if you don't agree with them.
That sounds tough, especially when you feel really strongly about something.
It can be, but Carnegie emphasizes that understanding their viewpoint doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It just means making an effort to see the world through their eyes, to grasp their motivations and their logic.
Yeah. It's like it ties into all the other principles we've been talking about. It's the foundation. If
Mhm.
you can truly understand where someone else is coming from, it's easier to, avoid arguments, respect their opinions, and find common ground.
You're absolutely right. And Carnegie shares a story about Sam Douglas, who used to criticize his wife for spending so much time gardening, even though, the lawn never really looked any better.
Oh man, I've been there. My partner loves to rearrange the furniture, and I just don't get it.
Well, after taking Carnegie's course, Douglas realized that he'd never even considered that his wife might simply enjoy gardening. It wasn't about the results, it was about the process. So he started helping her with the gardening and complimenting her efforts. And their relationship really blossomed as a result.
That's a simple but powerful example of how shifting our perspective can totally transform a conflict into a connection.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads and forget that other people have different motivations and perspectives.
Yeah,
And Carnegie reminds us that success in dealing with people really depends on a sympathetic grasp of the other person's viewpoint.
right.
It's about cultivating empathy and understanding, even when it's hard.
So, what does all this mean for us, in everyday life? How do we actually apply these principles?
Well, it starts with awareness.
Mm,
Simply being aware of these principles is the first step. And then it's about making a conscious effort to apply them, in your everyday interactions. Start small. Maybe next time you're about to get into an argument, take a breath and try to see things from their side. Or before you launch into a pitch, ask some questions and truly listen to what they have to say.
It's like building a new habit, right? It takes time and effort, but the payoff is huge.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. We're all going to mess up and fall back into old patterns sometimes. The key is to keep practicing, keep trying to connect with empathy and understanding.
Beautifully said. So, to wrap things up, here's a thought provoking question for our listeners to chew on. Think about an upcoming situation where you could apply one of these principles. How might it change how that interaction goes? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, so share your insights or any follow up questions you have in the comments below.
And remember, these principles aren't just about getting what you want. They're about building stronger, more meaningful relationships.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the timeless wisdom of Dale Carnegie. Until next time.